Here we go. Hey everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are stoked to be having this conversation. Stoked that people are spending a summer night in August on Zoom with us. Hopefully it will be very well worth your time. For those that don't know, my name is Molly Coleman. I'm the executive director of the People's Parity Project. We are an organization that works to organize law students and lawyers to unfuck the law, unrig the law, build a legal system that works for working people, not corporate profits. A big part of what that work entails is trying to challenge the corporate dominance on law school campuses. We are very aware that for those of you who are thinking about what your career is going to look like post-law school, you are likely to be being inundated with pro-corporate messaging, this idea that if you don't do OCI or on-campus interviews, that you have completely ruined your future and that there is no path forward. The goal of our event tonight is to remind you that that is not true and that you can actually have a wonderful, successful, incredible career as a lawyer, doing justice work, doing pro-people lawyering, and really working to challenge that dominant narrative within our profession. So I will stop talking and hand things over to our moderator this evening. Melissa Murphy is a student at the University of Baltimore Law School. She is an organizer with our PPP chapter there. She is fantastic. And I will hand it to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Molly. I would just like to echo what Molly said. Thank you all for giving us your time tonight, and especially thank you for the panelists. If throughout the panel, if there are any questions that you all want to ask, feel free to drop the question in the chat. If you're more comfortable with direct messaging Molly, go ahead and do that as well. And then she'll flag me and let me know about the questions. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a really good discussion tonight. So to get things started, I would just like to ask that each panelist introduce themselves and the work that you do. So whoever wants to start, jump right in.
I can start. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Moon Clifford, and I'm the director of the Housing Project at the Manhattan Office of the Legal Aid Society. I'm also an adjunct professor at NYU, where I teach a housing rights clinic, and I'm happy to be here with you.
I'll jump in. I'm Jacob Lipton, use he, him pronouns. I am the co-executive director of Justice Catalyst, a nonprofit where I administer a fellowship program for recent law school graduates, placing them in public interest organizations and state and local government. We also do support for nonprofits of many different types, for litigating nonprofits and for other legal nonprofits, and support public interest litigation in other ways.
Hey everyone, my name is Theanne Liu. I'm an associate at Alton & Golden. We're a firm that represents only employees, and I work in the class action practice group. Most of my clients, I generally do wage and hour work, and I represent clients in negotiations as well as litigation.
For our first question, to kind of get the ball rolling, did you always know you'd end up doing what you're doing right now, or was there a sort of aha moment that made you connect with public interest lawyering and made you go down that path? So Jacob, maybe if you would like to start us off with that.
I very much did not know what I would be doing. That has changed several times since I graduated from law school. So I did know coming into law school that I wanted to do public interest work, and that I didn't waver in that. But I had thought for a while that I would be much more internationally focused in various different ways. And then coming out of law school, I worked at a law school for many years in a more academic context, and then moved away from that. So what I'm doing has changed a lot, and I did not know always what it would be.
did you say, or did you say who would like to go next? Okay. I can go. I think you cut out a little bit. So for me, I think like I decided to attend law school because I wanted to do like the big, sexy international human rights stuff. And then when I got to law school, my focus kind of changed a little bit because I realized there are a lot of like domestic issues that deserve immediate attention. And right after I graduated from law school, I actually didn't have a job. Most of all my other friends had jobs. So I actually started volunteering at Bed-Stuy Legal Services, doing housing work. I had this wonderful mentor who kind of just like threw you to the wolves, and we kind of had to start litigating and practicing. And as soon as I started doing that, I think that was my aha moment, and I knew that's something that I wanted to do.
And for me, I knew I was interested in employment law going into law school, but I was open to other issues as well. I had done like a legal internship with the EEOC as an undergrad, which I honestly don't remember what I did. It was like kind of nothing. But I had like no idea like what like plaintiffs firms were. I didn't know about like public private interest law schools. So when I started like seriously like thinking about getting like my foot in the door in employment law, I just kind of started networking. I connected with Kaylee Gao, who I think used to be a board member of PPP, and she kind of like told me like all the things about like, here are these nonprofits, here are these people, and also like, have you considered firms? And I was like, oh, like no, but you know, that really helped.
I kind of want to touch on the idea of mentorship in law school, because especially listening to the answers that everybody gave, sounds like everyone enters into law school kind of trying to figure it out. A lot of times, if you do have an idea of what you want to get into, you kind of go through different pathways trying to figure it out. Were there any mentors for any of you all while you were in law school? So whether that be a professor or a student, organization leader, community leader, was there anybody that, kind of took you under their wing, so to speak?
So when I was in law school, I was a research assistant for Professor Pauline Kim. And she does work in like employment discrimination, AI discrimination, and privacy issues. So I was a research assistant for her for like a couple years, and like in addition to doing like work with her, I was like, hey, like, can I talk about like jobs and like how to do this, and like get insight into like firms as well as like nonprofits. So that was a really valuable relationship for me.
I think for me, because I went to a law school that was kind of primarily focused on like environmental law, to the extent you weren't interested in environmental law or that wasn't your primary focus, there weren't a lot of opportunities for you at that time in terms of like helping you find internships or setting you up for success after law school. I'm happy to say that the law school has shifted its focus and there's more broader social justice internships and opportunities for folks. But I think in my experience, I kind of had to seek out those people and those opportunities while I was in law school, just because the law school didn't really provide support.
So I did have a very close mentor in law school, a professor who I took John Hanson, who I took a bunch of his courses and ended up doing like putting on conferences with him with various student organizations and that kind of thing. And that for me grew into, I ended up working with him for several years after law school. That's the more academic background I was working in. So that was the closest for me. And I got the helpful kind of advice and other things from Office of Public Interest Advising, but not that type of mentorship.
And what experiences in law school were most important to how you approach your work now?
So law school is a little like fresher for me. I graduated a couple years ago in 2020. I don't know, like I think clinics were really valuable. I did a housing clinic. I also did a joint MSW with my JD, so I had to do a lot of like practicums as well. So doing like multiple internships and working in even like like strictly legal positions was valuable. Like I worked with Missouri Jobs of Justice as a social work practicum. But I was doing some like quasi like legal policy work, and I was working with the National Employment Law Project. And I actually thought like this experience was super valuable because I got sent to things like the Faith like Labor Alliance, like breakfasts, and I got to see like the local like Workers' Rights Board, things like that, where I felt like more connected to the community, like in St. Louis through organizations that were a little more on the ground.
For me, the biggest thing the experiences that were most valuable in law school, I think, were developing part of a public interest community and feeling part of that and having a sense of what different people were doing, and learning how to think about how the law interacts with systemic problems in society. And that's what I continue to try to do in my current work. And I did pick that up from some courses where that was the focus, and some courses where it wasn't, but that was as revealing. Some things I did not pick up that I end up doing a lot of now and kind of wished I had. Well, I do a lot of contracts of different kinds now and spend a lot of time thinking about nonprofit law, which I did not study. I also did not learn how to evaluate a case or think about how litigation could be successful, and I wish I had learned that in law school.
Yeah, I think echoing what the other panelists just said, I think you can't overemphasize clinical work and actually interacting with clients in a real world kind of setting. I think in my position now, where we're hiring a lot of law students, you just find that, you go through law school and you don't even know how to conduct a client interview after you graduate from law school. So I think to the extent you can get clinical experience, especially if you want to get into like doing direct services client work, it's really important to start seeking out those opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. That brings me kind of to the flip side of that question, which are there any traditional like law school markers of success that we hear about that weren't necessarily as helpful? So I know, for example, there's a lot of pressure to be on moot court, law review, have to have a certain GPA. And so I'm just wondering, what your all's experience is with those sort of like traditional markers of success.
I'll chime in. I want to say that unfortunately, some of those traditional markers of success are still indicators that people still use in evaluating candidates. I think in my hiring process, I try to like look past things like that and really see how people have distinguished themselves through their law school career, like if they've done internships at particular organizations, if they volunteered at particular organizations, are they members of like tenant organizations or other more community grassroots organizations. So like those indicators are still out there. And I do think like most organizations, including the Legal Aid Society, is moving away from using traditional things like law review, whether or not we're into like an Ivy League law school, as indicators of success in our current field right now.
I can speak to my own experience and the experience for the fellowship program I run. And in both cases, none of those things mattered. I know that Moon is right that in other contexts they still do. So this is just one context. But for the fellowship program, we don't look at transcripts or grades. Law review is not something we're looking at on resumes. And when we're looking at experiences like summer associate positions, that kind of things, we're looking at experiences that fit with the type of work people want to do. We're not paying attention to prestige or anything like that. So that's for us, and that's been my experience as well. I haven't had to show anyone my grades at any point.
Yeah, same in my case. So I don't, as a more junior associate, I don't actually I'm not as involved in the hiring process for associates or law clerks. But I just remember from my experience, I don't remember getting many questions about my participation in journal, except for when it's relevant, if you have a note that's about an interesting topic, sometimes people will ask about that. In terms of my law school journal experience, I guess I do site checking in my day-to-day every once in a while. But yeah, I think people most often focus on your actual experience and asking questions about that.
That's as a rising 2L, I just have to say personally, that's very good to hear. I feel like a lot of the hands-on kind of work that I feel like students who are interested in public interest lawyering kind of seems to be overlooked when we're talking to career centers and stuff like that, with people trying to help us plan our careers. And so it's really great to get the feedback from you all who are actually doing the work. When you were in law school, were you ever tempted to kind of go the more conventional, big law corporate kind of route? And if so, what kind of steered you back to the path that you're currently on?
I can chime in. When I was in law school, just because I had some of the traditional indicators, I was kind of steered by the career services folks towards an on-campus interview session with big firms that were there. And I did end up taking a couple of interviews with them. And then I randomly ended up in Portland, Maine. And I was like, what am I actually doing here? So yeah, I think it's pretty easy, especially if you go to a law school that's not necessarily public interest focused, to kind of get sucked into being redirected. So it's kind of incumbent on you to kind of keep your eyes on the prize and stay focused on why you went to law school in the first place and what really motivates you.
I wasn't tempted, and I think that a big part of that was developing a community. In my case, it was actually people at my law school and from some other law students at other law schools as well. And I was lucky to find that in my first year, and people who all were going in very different directions, but kind of shared a commitment to doing public interest work, and that made it kind of very easy for me, I think.
Yeah, similarly, because I was doing a joint MSW, I was able to successfully avoid career services because I was I'm not here. I'm at the social work school. And kind of with that, I felt like I was committing myself to doing public interest work. But I had definitely considered okay, what if I would do management side work? What would that look like? I asked a labor law professor what her thoughts on it were, and she advised me very strongly against doing that because unions hold grudges. That's what she told me. And she had an anecdote from a former student of hers. I had talked to a management side attorney who was talking about we're always trying to recruit law students to do this work, and it just didn't sit right with me. I just wasn't interested in it. That's not what I went to law school for. So I couldn't say I was really that tempted.
And when you all were deciding what jobs to take or sort of jobs to apply for, what were some factors that helped you make those decisions? Because, unfortunately, we know that public interest lawyering doesn't have the big paycheck that big law does, which I think is, one of the reasons that a lot of students kind of fall into that path with big law. But were there other things in terms of work-life balance or issues you felt passionately about that you knew you wanted to work on? Were there different factors helping you decide your career?
I will say the paycheck is certainly better than it was. You're not making $1 million, but you're certainly making a livable wage doing public interest work, especially in the field I'm in now. where I think most of you know that there's a right to counsel in housing now. So there's really like a big boom in terms of hiring housing attorneys, and all the organizations that participate in the right to counsel program do want pay parity. So it's a little competitive in terms of getting people on board with this. I forget the latter part of your question.
Oh, just kind of opening up a discussion around the different things that factors that you considered when taking your career job.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon work-life balance. So I think for me, that was pretty crucial. Being able to, you know, have a job that also allows you to be a whole person outside of it, and not just, you know, be like a writing monkey in a basement somewhere, or feeling like your job isn't fulfilling you. So for me, the longer I do this, the more I find that my job kind of just like bleeds into like my passion. So it doesn't necessarily feel like work, but you know, you do have to have boundaries. But I think if you're doing something that you're super passionate about, it doesn't feel as taxing if you have to put in extra hours every now and again. But certainly being in a position where you can like have time off and actually take vacation and like hang out with your kids is something that I actually considered my current job.
Yeah.
I'll say that location was a factor for me. I wanted to be in the same city as my partner. And beyond that, something that was intellectually stimulating mattered to me, but most of all, having a meaningful impact in the world. I was not familiar with this when I was in law school, but I want to plug a great article by Sheldon and Krieger called "What Makes Lawyers Happy." And I can put it in the chat as well. And they did a kind of big study of many different types of attorneys and found that internal factors made much a bigger difference in overall happiness than external factors. So factors like kind of autonomy in your work, ability to kind of feel like you're competent at your work, having internal motivation and work that fits your values, all really correlated with people's self-reported happiness in their legal careers, whereas factors like salary and prestige had no correlation with people's happiness. So I hadn't read that when I was in law school, I think, but it fit.
Great, thank you for sharing. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind dropping that in the chat, that would be excellent.
For me, I do think money was like a consideration, and you know, at a firm, I do think like, you know, in certain industries, you can be paid like a little more than like if you were doing like a local government job, and that was like something that I was considering in doing like workers' rights work, you know, on behalf of the city or like with a firm. Like one of the jobs like paid like half as much, and I'm like, I live in like Manhattan, and like the rent is like really going up, and I don't think I could like stay here next year. Also like location wise, my partner also had to be in New York. So I was looking into that too. In terms of work-life balance, like I'm here, like I have evenings and I have a mental like cut off where I'm like, I can't do like any work. And like at like a big law firm, like it's my partner, he's in big law. I am not exaggerating. He billed 19 hours yesterday. Like he like stayed up till 2 a.m., then woke up at 6 a.m. and then like has been working like it's not good. It's like specific to like certain practice areas, and that's like one like horror story. But it's been like kind of regular. I've seen it.
That's definitely very long, tough hours. If you weren't doing the work that you were doing now, what do you think you would be doing? So big open questions. It doesn't have to be law related. Could be a different career altogether that you were considering exploring.
I think I fantasize sometimes about like, you know, living in like a small town in Italy and like just having like a bakery. But then I snap out, right? But I think that doing public interest work, especially direct services work, is particularly draining, and burnout is like a real phenomenon. I've been doing this for over 12 years now, and you have to continue to rededicate yourself to the work and stay motivated. But I think if I wasn't doing the work that I'm doing now, which I think is extremely rewarding and meaningful, I probably wouldn't be practicing law. Yeah.
For me, the kind of roads not taken at various points include academia, include more international, much more international focus, whether that was kind of more like international development, human rights work that I thought I wanted to do for a while, and some kind of global trade policy work I thought about doing for a while. And yeah, those are some of the roads not taken.
I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm like a year into this job and I'm happy, but sometimes I'm like, oh, like what if? I don't know, being like a struggling academic, I considered, I was very interested in Asian American studies as an undergrad. I talked about it with professors and they were like, no, like go out into the real world, like don't be in academia. So I was like, okay, fine. Yeah, I don't know. I think about like arranging flowers. I don't know if I can make a living doing that. It seems it's fun. I have a friend who just quit her corporate job and she's like an interior designer, like barely. that seems okay.
Kind of circling back to what Moon was saying about burnout, with all of the different, number of critical issues that I feel like are a possibility that public interest lawyers can work on. How did you pick, what issue it was that you wanted to work on and focus on? And how do you kind of prevent burnout or check in with yourself when you're starting to feel burnt out?
So I feel I didn't really pick. I have ended up in a position that is very generalist and working on the fellowship program where it's working with fellows who are doing all kinds of different subject areas and all kinds of different approaches. And then also in the more grant support work is also very, very broad. And I think that I like that. It means you don't get in depth on things and you don't get direct client work. So that's would be a negative for some people. And then in terms of burnout, I think I'm lucky to work at an organization that that takes work-life balance seriously and has good vacation policy, and that helps a lot, and also is a very kind of collegial organization. So people are supportive of each other and we have conversations about work-life balance and about burnout. So I think that helps a lot.
I think for me, it's like a little bit multi-layered because I manage the managers and I manage the attorneys who are doing the direct client services work. So I take on cases for myself just because I think it's important to continue to represent clients in this position. But I think it really requires, in addition to having an organization that's pretty flexible and like acknowledges, the importance of like work-life balance. But if you're in a leadership position, I think it's really important to communicate to the team that you lead that you really do value things like work, not just like work-life balance in the abstract, but you think it's really important for people to take care of themselves so that they can show up to work. I think it's not helpful for anyone or useful for you, for your client, for the work, for you to show up with your tank totally half empty. You're not putting yourself in a good position. You're not putting your client in a good position. So I think in my position, I check in with people regularly and really make sure that people are taking care of themselves, because for me, it's paramount that people take care of themselves so that they can show up for the work. And I try to model examples of like what it looks like to be someone in my position or doing direct services work who does, cut off at a particular time. Like if you email me at 1 a.m., I'm not responding to your email. And I'm going to ask you why you emailed me at 1 a.m. around like 9 o'clock the next day. I know it's hard sometimes to like cut off and shut off, but like it's so imperative to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable to do direct services work or public interest work for extended amount.
Yeah, for me, so at a firm, I'm like the partner of my like practice area. Like we do like kind of like weekly like workload like check-ins, just like email like this is what's on my plate this week, this is what's on my plate this month. So I think certainly like the last couple of years, people have been very busy, and especially more like senior associates have been like especially busy because like juniors do work and they review it and they have a lot on their plates. So I do think like burnout like have been a problem, and I do think that it's something that they've been like trying to address seriously. And I think for me anyway, so I work a lot on cases like in California, so I work a lot with a partner in the California office. So sometimes he'll shoot off like an email when it's evening my time, but like at the end of their day over there. And I think something that's been like really helpful is like him saying like, hey, like this is a tomorrow thing, like enjoy your evening. And I think at least in my experience, partners have been pretty good about that. And because like we're the ones in the class action practice, like we're the ones who are often driving the cases, it's something that we can typically control, except for like specific filing deadlines and whatnot.
I want to add a couple more thoughts on this. I think I answered maybe half of the question, not the other half, which is that part of one of the things that was driving kind of where I was looking, as I think I said, was somewhere that was intellectually stimulating. And one myth that I think there is that the most prestigious work tends to be the most intellectually stimulating. And my view from friends who are in all different types of careers and parts of the profession is that the type of work that Moon and Bian do is much more stimulating than the type of work that like working in a big firm, say, and the variety of different experiences and the kind of amount of thinking and adapting to different circumstances and situations you have to do as a legal aid lawyer or as a plaintiff's lawyer are just very, very different than what you have to do as a defense side lawyer. And I think that's much more exciting and stimulating. I also say in terms of kind of deciding what to work on, I think especially in the public interest world, a lot of people I've have known jump around and move between different things, whether that's within one organization, you take on different roles over time, or moving around between different organizations. So I think a very important thing is not to think of the first job that you take out of law school as, okay, this is my career. And it makes it much easier to not be thinking of what's my career now, as opposed to like, what's my next step now, and knowing that there are going to be different paths from there.
Great. I feel like having this idea of what is my career going to be when I get out of law school adds so much pressure to making every single little decision, like the most crucial decision as a student. I feel like as law students, we already are like critiquing everything that we do. And so it's good to get some perspective and kind of move away from your first job is going to be your end all, career that you have to continue with. But kind of speaking, Jacob, to what you said, you brought up a good point about the different attorney roles having different day-to-day tasks. So I was wondering if each of you could kind of give us a rundown of what your day-to-day looks like. So whether that's meetings, doing research. I know, Moon, you mentioned supervising some attorneys as well. And so if we could kind of get a little bit more information on what the day-to-day looks like, that would be great.
Sure. Today is an atypical day. There are a lot of meetings today, and I actually just personally took on an appellate division case that I'm writing a brief for right now because I think it's an interesting topic and no one else wanted it. But the day-to-day for me is typically meeting with the supervisors. So for a long time, housing court was like shut down and appearances were virtual. And now we're going back to doing the right to counsel in person. So next Monday, we're gearing up for our first right to counsel, in court representation shift. So setting up the scheduling, coming up with protocols for that, and then gearing up for the unit meeting to discuss all of these changes with the attorneys tomorrow. I will say that lawyers in the and the staff at the Legal Aid Society are in a union. So, everything is subject to a collective bargaining agreement. I love the union, but sometimes everything is a little bit of a fight. So it kind of varies from day-to-day meetings, dealing with like client complaints sometimes if there's issues with the attorneys on particular cases, getting referrals from our criminal division. Yeah, so nice mix of stuff.
Definitely sounds like keeps you busy.
So yeah, I think my day-to-day also kind of differs depending on what I feel like doing, because I feel like I have at least some kind of relative control over like some work that I'm doing, depending on what it is. If it's like an investigation, like sometimes the deadlines are a little bit more flexible, but we want to like push things out. So I do like intakes with prospective clients for our investigation matters. I sometimes will draft demand letters, draft like a complaint if we feel like sending along like a draft complaint that we'll file. We'll do that. Today was a slightly atypical day where I was reviewing like some client documents, and I blocked off a lot of time to do some research on the specific issue to prepare for like a meet and confer tomorrow. Yesterday was also like a weird day in that we did like an initial consultation with the pro bono client. And then I did a deposition prep for someone that we're defending a deposition for. And I think coming up later this week, I'm going to have a bunch of like client calls to talk to people and perhaps like gather like class member declarations in advance of like filing for class cert. But yeah, it's a little bit all over the place. Sometimes you have to like deal with Excel and damages calculations. That's the whole thing that I don't want to think about.
So I work remotely, and most of our office is basically remote. So my day is mostly Zoom meetings and phone calls. That's the majority of the hours in working hours, and then a lot of responding to emails. And then other than that, it kind of varies quite a lot. So today I was working on a couple of different kind of grant agreements and a impact investment contract in between those calls, but that would be different every day.
It sounds like a lot of different tasks all the time, which, you know, keeps your mind going and not too mundane and the same old thing every day. So that's pretty exciting. We talked about burnout and taking care of ourselves on a more like mental health, personal level. But I know a big concern for students who are looking to go into public interest careers is the amount of debt that, you know, we have to pay back as law students taking out loans. And so I was wondering if any of you all would kind of, you know, give some insight or advice, whether it's personal experience or, you know, how you've seen colleagues approach paying off loans, and whether they've looked into the loan forgiveness program and things like that.
Yeah, I think for me, like loan forgiveness is like a huge saving grace and a motivator. A number of folks, you know, just 10 years at a public interest firm or a nonprofit and just pay your minimum payments and your loans will be forgiven in 10 years. So I think for me, that's a huge part of how I'm able to stay doing what I'm doing is because of programs like loan forgiveness. And I will say part of it, and I think in the beginning, I was of the mind that it's like, oh my God, I have all this debt. I'm never going to be able to pay off this debt. But I think reframing it as I'm going to make 120 payments and then I'm done. Versus like thinking you're ever going to pay off your student loans. Unless you're working at a huge firm, you're never going to really be able to pay off your student loans. But I do think things like loan forgiveness and just meeting those payments will help you ease your mind. It's so much you're not going to pay it off like unless you do work at a big firm, and I think loan forgiveness is the way here.
So I was very fortunate and had a combination of like scholarships and financial support from my parents, such that I didn't have student loans. Part of that was my parents wanted me to work at a firm, so they're like, so I was looking into the public like interest, like loan forgiveness stuff. And they were like, no, like if we pay for this, then you can maybe work at a firm instead. I'm just like, okay. But it actually kind of worked out such that I'm working at like a private firm, and it wouldn't necessarily qualify for public interest like loan forgiveness, even though I think our framing of it is that it is. But my partner does have significant student loans, and I'm marrying him later this year, so those are also going to be my loans, kind of, as marital property. And yeah, it's like rough. The pause has been good, but I think we've been like seriously looking into public interest like loan forgiveness, if you can transfer into transition into doing government work, things like that. I was going to say something else, but I forgot. But yeah.
I'm not sure I have personal advice I can give here, but I think Moon's advice was spot on in that both, you know, debt is real and not nothing, and everyone's circumstances are going to be different. And also, the best you can do is try and put aside all the temporarily put aside the kind of the fear that comes with a big number, and try and really break down, you know, what will it actually look like if I'm able to do these different types of careers, and that people could make different decisions off of that, but trying to look as clearly as possible at the information is the best you can do.
I really liked that piece of advice about looking at it as, you know, 100 and some payments versus one big lump payment. I did that similarly with my car loan. It's like, once you start paying it monthly, you're like, oh, okay, I can do this. So I'm coming up on my last question here. So if anyone in the audience wants to drop some final questions in the chat that we haven't gotten to, please do so. But I think one question that I would like to ask you all is if you could go back and give yourself a bit of advice as a law student, what do you think you would tell your 1L, 2L, 3L self? What would be helpful, knowing now that you didn't know then?
So this is specifically about the job search process and the public interest job search process. I was so stressed, like it was bad. I had like an eye twitch. I like cried at a restaurant in public, like, and then I got a job like 3 weeks later. So I would say like with like things, well, I think, you know, for the most part, like work out, and you don't, I think like the pressure of like having something like immediately, you know, like it'll be okay.
Yeah. I think in addition to that, like I don't know how the old saying goes, but something like comparison is like the theft of joy. I think you're gonna find that your trajectory is gonna be really different than some of your friends' trajectory in law school, and that you shouldn't let that dissuade you from continuing to forge ahead in the path that you're on. I think for me, like I had a lot of friends who, you know, ended up going to work at firms or like immediately got jobs at these various organizations that they, you know, ultimately got jaded from working there. So just like stay the course. Your own time is your own time. And like, yeah, it'll work out, but don't compare yourself to other law students. It's a losing game.
I think both of those pieces of advice are better than any advice I can give my past self, but I do wish in law school, I wish I'd taken, I didn't take a clinic, and I wish I had taken one or more. So that's one piece. Trying the best to get out of law school, which does not seem to me to be designed for it, a way to enable you to be empowered in your career, is what advice I give myself.
Thank you all so much. This has been a really great conversation. I know that I've learned and heard some insightful tips, so I appreciate all of you sharing your insight with us. And I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Molly.
Hey, everybody. Thanks again to our panelists. This was fantastic. Melissa, thank you so much. Theanne like really relate to crying in a restaurant during the job search process. If you don't cry in a restaurant, I think you're doing it wrong. But it does get better. Anyway, really appreciate you all being here. Just want to give one final plug for those of you who are not already involved in PPP. This is just a glimpse into the type of work that we do. Like I said up top, really trying to create a community of folks who want to use their law degrees to make the world better. We do a lot of work around, specific legal advocacy issues, including most prominently in the workers' rights space. Do a lot of work around court reform, build what we think is a pretty dope community, as evidenced by some of the folks we have here tonight. So would love to get to know you all more, organize with you, and bring you into this group of folks. So you all have my email, you all have Steve's email, because you got emails from us about this event tonight. So let us know if you are interested in chatting more. We'd love to have you involved. And thank you again to everybody for being here. And with that, we are done. Have a great night all.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.